Why the super empath's ice, cold no contact terrifies the avoidant. You see, when an avoidant pulls away, they're used to a predictable pattern. They withdraw and the other person chases. They create distance and the other person fights to close the gap. That cycle feeds their sense of control. But when a super empath, someone with deep emotional awareness, strength, and self-respect, decides to go ice cold no contact, everything shifts. Suddenly, the avoidant no longer has the upper hand. The rules of the game break. The empath's silence speaks louder than any argument, louder than any desperate text. It says, I value myself too much to keep dancing to your rhythm. And for the avoidant, that's terrifying. Because what they fear most isn't closeness, it's losing control. Ice, cold no contact exposes the truth. The avoidant never held the power. The empath did. The moment the empath removes their energy, the avoidant has nothing to feed on. It leaves them face to face with their own emptiness, their own patterns, their own choices. And here's the beauty of it. No contact isn't about punishment. It's about liberation. It's about saying, my peace matters more than your inconsistency. My future matters more than your fear. So if you've ever wondered whether walking away leaves you weaker, remember this silence isn't weakness. It's strength at its loudest. And it terrifies those who thought they could keep you forever orbiting around them. When an avoidant pulls away, they count on a very familiar script. They know that by retreating, creating silence, or acting distant, the other person will often panic and lean in harder. That leaning in gives the avoidant reassurance, but it also feeds their control. It reinforces the belief that they can withdraw without truly losing the relationship because the other person will always close the gap for them. This cycle gives them a sense of security, even though it's built on fear and avoidance rather than real connection. But the moment a super empath decides not to play along, the entire script is torn apart. A super empath isn't just deeply feeling, they are also deeply aware. They sense the patterns, they see the cycles, and they understand the cost of continuing to chase someone who runs every time intimacy gets close. Instead of feeding that dynamic, they choose something far more powerful to stop, to let the avoidant pull away and not follow. That refusal to chase isn't a passive act, it's an active declaration of self-worth. It communicates without words that their love and energy will not be squandered on someone who weaponizes distance. For the avoidant, this is utterly destabilizing. Their usual safety net disappears. They are used to believing that no matter how much space they create, the empath will come after them, reaffirming their value and soothing their fears. But when the empath steps back and remains silent, the avoidant suddenly faces the possibility that their distance might actually cost them something. That realization is terrifying because it removes the illusion of control they've been clinging to. The break in the cycle also forces the avoidant to see the truth of the relationship. They can no longer rely on the predictable push-pull pattern to distract from their own inner fears. Instead, they are left with silence, and in that silence, they begin to feel the weight of their own choices. The empath's refusal to chase shines a light on the imbalance that has existed all along. One person constantly giving, the other constantly retreating. This moment of disruption is powerful because it flips the emotional dynamic. The avoidant, who thought they were in charge by holding back, realizes that the real power always belonged to the one who was willing to walk away. The super empath, by choosing no contact, proves that they are not bound to the cycle. They show that love, care, and connection are not things that can be taken for granted. They must be reciprocated or they will be withdrawn. The avoidance of chasing also changes how the empath feels about themselves. Instead of being caught in a loop of trying to prove their worth to someone who fears intimacy, they begin to embody their worth through their actions. Each day of silence, each decision not to reach out is a quiet reinforcement of their strength. They learn that withholding their energy isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's choosing peace over chaos, dignity over desperation. This is why the cycle breaking is so powerful. It doesn't just terrify the avoidant because it shakes their control. It empowers the empath, reminding them that they were never powerless to begin with. Silence is one of the most underestimated forms of communication, and yet it carries a weight that words often cannot. When a super empath chooses to go ice cold no contact, the silence itself becomes a message, not of anger, not of bitterness, but of unshakable self-respect, where arguments, explanations, or emotional pleas might once have been used to try to reach the avoidant. Silence steps in and speaks louder. It says, without any need for defense, that the empath has chosen themselves. That single act changes the entire dynamic because it strips away the noise and leaves only the truth. For the avoidant, silence is confronting in a way that words never are. Words can be debated, dismissed, or twisted. An avoidant can hear a plea and convince themselves that they still hold power, that they are still being pursued. But silence offers no such comfort. Silence is absolute. It cannot be negotiated. It cannot be reinterpreted, and it cannot be softened by excuses. It forces the avoidant to sit with the reality that the empath is no longer engaging, no longer feeding the cycle, and no longer giving them the reassurance they crave without ever having to step up in return. The silence of no contact also communicates boundaries in a way that talking about them sometimes cannot. People can dismiss spoken boundaries as empty threats or emotional outbursts. But when those boundaries are lived, when they are enacted through action rather than explained through words, they become undeniable. Silence is the living embodiment of the boundary. I will not participate in this dynamic any longer. I will not beg for attention. I will not make myself small to hold on to you. That message, unspoken but deeply felt, shakes the foundation of the avoidant's control. For the empath themselves, silence becomes a tool of reclamation. It's not simply about cutting off contact to punish or prove a point. It's about redirecting energy inward. Every unanswered call, every ignored message, every day of unbroken silence is an affirmation of self-worth. It teaches the empath that they are strong enough not to seek validation from someone who withholds intimacy. It allows them to rebuild their confidence and focus on their own peace rather than the chaos of trying to fix someone else. What makes silence so powerful in this context is its finality. Words often leave room for negotiation. A chance that maybe things can change if the right sentence is said, if the right emotion is expressed. Silence offers no such opening. It communicates finality without drama, certainty without aggression. It makes the statement, this is no longer acceptable, and I do not need to explain myself for choosing peace. That message lands harder than any long conversation could because it leaves nothing for the avoidant to manipulate. Silence strips the dynamic down to its core truth. It is the empath's way of reclaiming control without needing to raise their voice, without needing to justify themselves. And in that stillness, the avoidant is left not with the distraction of conflict, but with the emptiness created by their own avoidance. That is what terrifies them most. The realization that silence has closed the door, and that power now rests entirely with the one who chose not to speak. The avoidant's greatest fear is often misunderstood. On the surface, it may seem like what they fear most is closeness, intimacy, or vulnerability. While that is true to an extent, the deeper fear that drives their behavior is the loss of control. They have built a protective system around themselves where distance and withdrawal keep them feeling safe. By pulling away, they dictate the pace of the relationship, creating space whenever it feels overwhelming. That control allows them to manage their anxieties, but it also keeps them from facing their own patterns. When a super empath goes ice, cold no contact, it strips that sense of control away, and that is what truly terrifies the avoidant. In the avoidant's usual cycle, they know that retreating leads to pursuit. They hold the reins by deciding when to engage and when to disappear. The other person's reactions reassure them that they are still desired, still significant, and still in control of the dynamic. The super empath, however, breaks this expectation completely. Instead of chasing, they respond with silence. Instead of pushing harder for connection, they release it. This reversal is deeply unsettling because it forces the avoidant to recognize that their tactics no longer work. Loss of control strikes at the heart of the avoidant's fears because control is their shield. It keeps them from having to experience the discomfort of intimacy while still keeping someone tethered to them. But when the empath chooses to detach, that tether is cut. Suddenly, the avoidant is no longer dictating the rhythm of the relationship. They are faced with an unfamiliar reality. Their withdrawal does not guarantee pursuit, and their silence does not guarantee attention. That absence of predictability feels like the ground has been pulled out from beneath them. What makes this so terrifying is that it exposes the avoidant's dependency on the very thing they resist. They have relied on the other person's pursuit to validate their importance, while simultaneously avoiding the closeness that pursuit represents. When the empath no longer plays that role, the avoidant is left staring at the emptiness they have created. It becomes clear that their control was never real power. It was a fragile illusion dependent on someone else's willingness to engage. For the super empath, this moment is a turning point. By withdrawing completely, they highlight the truth of the dynamic. They demonstrate that they are not bound to the avoidance patterns, and that love cannot survive without reciprocity. The avoidant is forced to confront the fact that their behavior doesn't just create space, it destroys connection. And in that realization, the fear of losing control merges with the fear of genuine loss. The avoidant's terror lies not in the silence itself, but in what it represents. It is the moment they understand that the empath has taken back their power, that the cycle has ended, and that no amount of retreat will bring the old dynamic back. It is a mirror held up to their deepest fear, not intimacy, but the undeniable truth that they cannot control someone who has chosen themselves over the cycle. No contact is often misunderstood as an act of coldness, but in reality, it is an act of reclamation. When a super empath decides to cut off all communication with an avoidant, they are not trying to win a game or prove superiority, they are redirecting energy back to themselves. For so long, the empath has poured their emotional resources into someone who resists closeness, giving reassurance, patience, and love without receiving the same in return. The decision to go no contact is the moment that energy stops flowing outward and begins to flow inward again. It is a shift from investing in someone else's fear to investing in their own peace. This redirection is powerful because empaths are naturally inclined to give. Their strength lies in their ability to feel deeply and connect authentically, but when paired with an avoidant, that strength can become a trap. The empath can find themselves stuck in a cycle of over-giving, constantly trying to bridge the gap created by the avoidance distance. This imbalance drains them, leaving little energy for their own well-being. No contact interrupts that drain. It cuts off the endless supply line of emotional reassurance the avoidant has grown accustomed to and reclaims that power for the empath's healing and growth. The act of reclaiming energy also changes the way the empath views themselves. Instead of defining their worth by how much they can endure or how well they can hold space for someone who resists intimacy, they begin to embody a new standard. I am worthy of the same love and effort I give. Each day without contact reinforces this truth. With every moment of silence, the empath learns to sit with their own presence, nurture their own needs, and rebuild their sense of identity outside of the relationship dynamic. The energy once spent managing someone else's avoidance becomes fuel for personal clarity, strength, and future growth. For the avoidant, this shift is deeply unsettling. They are used to being the center of the empath's focus, even when they create distance. The empath's reassurance has served as a safety net, allowing the avoidant to withdraw without fear of true abandonment. When that energy is no longer available, the avoidant feels the absence acutely. The silence becomes more than just a lack of communication. It becomes a mirror reflecting back the consequences of their avoidance. They are left with the reality that their push and pull tactics no longer work and that the connection they took for granted is no longer being fed. What makes this terrifying for the avoidant is not only the loss of control, but also the loss of supply. They no longer receive the comfort of knowing the empath will always be there. The dynamic they relied on to soothe their hidden insecurities collapses the moment the empath chooses themselves. And while that realization may frighten the avoidant, it liberates the empath. Because in reclaiming their energy, the empath stops living in reaction to someone else's fear and begins to build a life rooted in their own peace, purpose, and dignity. Strength is often mistaken for loud declarations, visible battles, or dramatic exits, but in truth, some of the greatest demonstrations of strength are expressed in quiet, steady actions. When a super empath chooses to walk away with dignity instead of staying to plead, explain, or fight for recognition, that silence becomes a profound act of power. It is not weakness to step back without fanfare, it is the clearest sign of self-assurance. By leaving with calm resolve rather than emotional chaos, the empath communicates that their worth is not up for negotiation. For an avoidant, this kind of strength is deeply unsettling. They are accustomed to emotional reactions, to the reassurance that even in conflict, the empath is still engaged. Arguments, tears, and attempts to fix the relationship all signal to the avoidant that they still hold significance and influence. But when the empath quietly withdraws, leaving behind no drama and no pursuit, it deprives the avoidant of that feedback loop. The absence of conflict and the absence of begging sends a sharper message than words ever could. I no longer need you to validate me. This quiet strength dismantles the illusion the avoidant depends on. They often convince themselves that their distance and inconsistency do not drive people away, because in the past, it hasn't. The empath has always closed the gap. But when the empath chooses to walk away in silence, it proves otherwise. It demonstrates that distance has consequences, that withdrawal is not met with endless forgiveness, and that love cannot survive without effort. The avoidant is forced to face the reality that the very person they assumed would always be there has chosen to end the cycle without a single word of persuasion. For the empath, this act of dignified departure is not about punishment, but about preservation. It is about refusing to lower themselves into a cycle of chasing, begging, or compromising their value. Quiet strength allows them to maintain their integrity, to leave the situation without resentment eating away at them. By not engaging in endless explanations or emotional outbursts, they conserve their energy and hold on to their self-respect. It becomes an act of honoring their own boundaries and demonstrating to themselves that they are capable of walking away when something no longer serves their well-being. There is also a timeless confidence in choosing dignity over desperation. Words and arguments often lose their impact because they can be ignored, debated, or dismissed. Actions, however, especially the action of leaving, cannot be denied. When the empath shows strength by exiting quietly, the impact lingers long after their presence is gone. The avoidant cannot argue with the silence, nor can they dismiss the choice. The absence itself becomes the message, and that message is powerful. You no longer have access to my energy, my love, or my presence. This quiet strength terrifies the avoidant precisely because it reveals the true balance of power. The one who can walk away without noise is the one who holds control. And for the empath, that choice is the ultimate declaration of self-worth, proving that their strength was never in how much they endured, but in their ability to choose peace over chaos. And so, when the super empath chooses ice, cold, no contact, it is not an act of cruelty, but of clarity. It is not about punishment, but about power. The power to reclaim energy, to shatter toxic cycles, and to stand in a dignity that needs no defense. The avoidant may fear intimacy, but what truly terrifies them is the loss of control. And when silence replaces pursuit, when calm replaces chaos, the message is undeniable: the empath has chosen themselves. That choice is liberation. It is the turning point where love is no longer tangled in fear, where peace outweighs uncertainty, and where strength is measured not by how long someone endures, but by their courage to walk away. So if you've ever wondered whether silence is enough, let this be your reminder. Silence is everything. It is louder than arguments, sharper than ultimatums, and stronger than begging ever could be. It is the voice of self-respect, and it echoes far beyond the end of a conversation. Thank you for listening, for opening your heart to this message, and for valuing the kind of strength that doesn't shout but simply stands. May you carry this truth with you: that choosing yourself is never the end of your power, but the beginning of it. Goodbye, and thank you